Hey guys, it's Mitch. How's it going? We're back to finish off this little two-page story. This is the second half of Todd McFarlane's excuse to draw a whole bunch of splash pages about Spider-Man fighting Morbius. This is Sub-City Part 2 in Spider-Man number 14 from 1991. I did do the first part of this just a little while ago, so if you're worried about missing out on some kind of story elements, you could go back and watch that. There's not a whole lot to catch up on. Spider-Man's investigating the disappearance of a bunch of homeless people. It led him down into the sewers, and it turns out that Morbius has kind of built himself a homeless army that is kidnapping people from up top. And that's kind of the extent of it. There's a whole lot of words to kind of try and flesh that out that weren't delivered particularly convincingly. That's what you get in a Todd McFarlane book. As a weird little aside, this is the 8th issue, I think, of the Spider-Man run that I've now covered, which is more than half of Todd McFarlane's work on it. And you couple that with, I think I covered at least 13 issues of Spawn. So I feel like the Todd McFarlane corner of my channel has built up to be, a little bit sturdy at least. It's not going to challenge my Liefeld playlist or my Jim Lee playlist. Those are kind of the pillars of the channel. But it has given me ample opportunity to read a whole bunch of comics written by a guy who doesn't read books. So that's a good time guaranteed. We might as well dive right in. We can start with the cover here. We're getting near the end of Todd McFarlane's tenure on Spider-Man, where his patience is running out, and I think he's probably having some difficulty keeping up with the schedule. And it's starting to show a little bit. I will say it still mystifies me that Todd was able to keep on his schedule as often as he was, considering how much noodling he does on every page. A big part of that is down to the fact that he doesn't do a ton of penciling when he is doing both the penciling and the inking. He just kind of gives himself sort of a detailed breakdown, and then he gets in there and starts scribbling. But, you take the fact he's doing both pencils and inks on this, which, he didn't have to do, and then you throw on the writing duties. He's also doing covers. He did letters as well last issue, not in this one at least. And it feels a fair bit like Todd is trying to make this his own little fiefdom. And he doesn't really know the best way to go about doing that. He figures maybe if he just, throws more of himself into the comic and somehow separates it from the rest of the Marvel Universe, then that will just kind of plant the Todd flag. Again, this isn't anything I don't think he's ever said. This is just the feeling I get reading it. But he starts out with a mosaic kind of cover here, which is all right. It's not his best mosaic cover. It feels like a little bit rehashed from Spider-Man number 3, which is the Voodoo cover from the Torment storyline. So that's this one here. There's kind of similarities, at least in the type of imagery that he throws on there. He's got to make sure to get the webs, of course, and the spiders and all that shit. But kind of a sloppier version. We've got this character here who never does get a name in the book, either in this issue or in the previous one. We've got our Morbius that it felt like Todd had a half an idea about how he wanted to draw him. And then, but he wanted to fit in the big kind of black suit symbol here, and then couldn't figure out a way quick enough to integrate the two together. And then decided he needed an image of Spider-Man on there, because of course he needed an image of Spider-Man. And he went, fuck it, people like the ones where I put his ass on backwards. Let's try that. By no means is it a bad cover. It's just, it feels rushed to me, where he didn't have a clear idea of what he wanted to do. And he went, you know what, I'm just going to try and throw some shit together. And I'm Todd McFarlane. I can make shit work. Which, most of the time, I think he's been correct up until now. So I don't blame him for just being like, I'll figure it out when I get there. He just didn't quite get there on this one. All right, so this is Sub-City Part 2. So just before we get started on the story itself, I just want to remind you guys real quick that the Kickstarter for Blood Force number 1 is up and live. This is the comic I've been working on for 3 years. There's 5 issues in the bank. We've got 19 days to go on this campaign, and we're getting closer to reaching the goal. So if you haven't already, click the link in the description, go check it out, see if it's something you might dig. It's my stab at image style art, and then applying that to a satire of extreme style comics. It's a fun time. And the original art tiers, there's still some available, so get in now before those run out. All right, so back to this. Might as well do the credits real quick. Todd McFarlane, story, pencils, inks. Rick Parker, letters. Gregory Wright, colors. Jim Salicrup, editor. This is the last issue he would do for that. And Tom DeFalco as editor-in-chief. The guy who was given the enviable task of trying to keep Todd McFarlane happy. I think he did about as well a job as he could have on that for as long as he could have. All right, get a quick breakdown about what happened in the previous issue via gigantic exposition dump, as is tradition in a Todd comic. Todd needs to drop these in fairly often at the beginning of an issue, at least at this time when he's writing, because he doesn't know a way to integrate things organically. So I get the feeling he just feels these are pages like you kind of need a sacrifice in the pretense of saying that this is a story you're about to read. Like I'm not really going to be able to sell this one for too much. It'll be like mid four figures. But we're going to make up for that with some big ticket items later down the line. So flip the page, and we're going to get a huge double page splash of Spider-Man being swarmed by a bunch of cartoon characters. So this is the homeless army that Morbius has amassed. They're all gathering in the sewers, and they've kind of forgotten how to speak properly. You get the feeling that their intelligence has been stunted somehow, and for some reason they're coming across, as more and more cartoony the longer they spend underground. We're going to get some close-ups of just a bunch of like really weird-looking characters that Todd felt like drawing that day, including kind of a proto-violator. This is Kiever. He's kind of Morbius's point man, and he shows up a few times. And Todd's doing what he can to try and include some traditional Spider-Man type quips. I feel like his tone is often not quite on the mark. Like, for instance, while he's fighting his way through this horde of, homeless people, he's just talking to himself about how much they stink and saying how he wishes he had Spidey nasal plugs. I don't know what's worse, the fact that these guys are kidnappers and possible murderers, or their incredibly offensive body odor. I'm going to guess it's the fact that they're kidnappers and potential murderers. This is the weird thing about Todd's version of Spider-Man. He wants to do these super grim and gritty stories involving, this guy in this colorful costume who swings around in New York City. And, those two things don't really mesh too well. So he's got to throw in all the quippy one-liners, maybe at the behest of editors. I'm gonna guess that's a possibility. But like one of the deals with Spider-Man is that he's kind of like conscientious and like empathetic. So Todd's Spider-Man every once in a while just kind of comes across as a dick who doesn't really take the gritty situation that Todd's thrown him into seriously. It kind of comes down to you can write fun-loving Spidey adventures, or you can write a grim and gritty take on Spider-Man that probably not too many people really want to read for too long. We've already been through the Perception storyline where Spider-Man was, for some reason, investigating a child murderer. Anyway, this is all ground we've covered before. Like the splashes, I don't know, I found myself looking at this closely, thinking like this is obviously designed, as are most of the pages in this book, for resale. That's the point of these pages. And it's like, I guess this kind of qualifies for that, although, most of the real estate is taken up with all of these super cartoony faces that, at least Todd's having some fun drawing them and everything. It doesn't necessarily make for the greatest looking spread. Spidey looks pretty good, at least. This is that character from the cover who is the ex-leader of the homeless people down here. Again, we don't get a name for this guy, and he's not ever going to return. And he's just kind of lamenting to himself about how they've kind of lost their way, and they're just kind of this mindless horde now. And Spidey pulls off his big move, which is to jump up to the ceiling and wait for a second. And that's kind of it. There's some fun stuff on the page, like particularly this panel right here, where he's got the big strands of webbing that he's hanging on to that are going to go outside the panel board. That's some good looking stuff. So Spidey hops up to the ceiling and just kind of thinks about his situation and thinks that, man, I didn't do a very good job of preparing for this. My big idea was to put on the black costume so that Todd could do a cool homage to the issue 1 cover for issue 13. And the justification for the black suit was that they wouldn't be able to see him as well, but then it turns out that their night vision is actually quite good, so it's completely pointless. And he traumatized Mary Jane for no reason. Because she saw him in the black suit, and she's like, man, I got some bad feelings about that suit. Like, there was some horrifying shit happened to me because of that suit, Or at least some implied horrifying shit. After a moment of thinking to himself how he's got to find the leader for these people, because they keep referencing the leader. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump back down. And we're like on page 6 or something. So far, Spidey has had no moves. He jumps back down into the mass of homeless people. When he jumped up, they were all like, oh, we're so sorry. Come back down. We be nice now. And then, when he gets back down in the thick of them, they're just like, ha ha, you stupid. And that pisses Spidey off because that's the one thing that Todd can think of to get out of a jam for a superhero is basically you just kind of push them to the breaking point, and then they break. And because they have superpowers, they win. So we get some really quick thwip sound effects here, and then we get a splash page where Spidey webbed up 4 of them, and he's using them as human shields. There seem to be a few more than 4, and it's not as though the other guys kind of came after him after he did this. So this feels like just Todd thought this would be a cool splash to draw. You know, I think we all know the Todd McFarlane method of crafting a story by now, which is that he draws 10 or 12 splash pages or cool-looking pages, one of the two, and then kind of lays those out on his floor and just shimmies them around until they kind of look like a story, and then draws pages to interconnect those. So yeah, with his big pillows full of homeless people, he now threatens the remaining homeless people who are a little bit hesitant about attacking him, saying, let's see, anyway, you guys want to fight? I'll give you a fight, but don't blame me if I rip a few arms and heads off and use them as clubs. Besides, I'm famished, and you guys smell pretty tasty. Yum, yum, yum. Now I'm really ready, so who's going to be the first victim? And this naturally is just Spidey kind of bluffing because the people he's fighting are stupid, which does kind of underscore that, like, why are you fighting a horde of stupid people, man? We already established that he could get away from them by climbing up to the ceiling. Like, just fucking get up to the ceiling and run away. Like, yeah, there's the whole thing where he's got to find the leader. That's kind of his only motivation in this. But I feel like you could have done that through, like, any kind of storytelling, really. So, yeah, okay. The homeless guys just kind of leave him alone and kind of point him in the general direction. And the guys he's got strapped to him are going to guide him the rest of the way. And then he just, leaves him in a pile and swings off. And I feel like we could have just gone from the point where Spidey jumps up to the ceiling to here, where he swings away. The only problem, of course, is that there's nothing to fill those pages. And then it doesn't even matter that he was looking for the leader, because Morbius finds him and comes swooping at him in the dark, doesn't recognize him. I guess Morbius has never seen Spider-Man in his black costume, which sounds possible. I think he showed up a couple of times when he first appeared in the 70s, and then it kind of feels like they ran out of ideas for what to do with him. So they just kind of left him with Doctor Strange for a little while, with him trying to find a cure, and this is probably his first appearance in a few years at this point. Spidey tries to kind of reason with him, saying, no, it's me, I'm Spider-Man, and Morbius decides that he's not convinced, so he swoops at him again. Guess Morbius can fly. I don't think he was really able to do that before. He did the whole thing where he rode his costume. We discussed this before in the Morbius #1 review. We're getting to the fun stuff, though, that Todd wants to draw, at least, where he gets to do close-ups on Morbius's monster-type face. He has to do these shots of Morbius swooping at Spider-Man. Did it a couple of times here, actually. And we're going to get a whole lot of dialogue that doesn't amount to a whole lot. Just Morbius keeps saying how he doesn't have a choice. He has to drink people's blood, and this is the solution he's found, where he found these people, and he kind of cult of personality them into being like servants for him, and going out and finding people for him to feed off of. The reason he's not going to do it is because he doesn't like to choose. And then Spidey keeps saying, that's bad. You're a doctor. Don't do that. And of course, it's all just an excuse to have a big double page splash of big monster man Morbius versus black suit Spider-Man. You know, like, these are fun shots. And it's cool that we did get a fair amount of fun shots in this comic, at least. It's in service of nothing, other than maybe feeding Todd's oddly growing interest in writing stories prominently featuring homeless people without actually humanizing homeless people. In fact, he kind of went the opposite way in this, in that he expressly dehumanizes them. And yeah, more punching, more I don't have a choice, more Spider-Man going, no, we can find a cure together. Again, just kind of an excuse to have some fun-looking shots. You know, nobody's ever going to say that Todd McFarlane doesn't come up with fun-looking pages. He knows how to twist up Spider-Man in fun ways that people want to see. He knows how to do a dynamic shot. Like, this is pretty great, really, with Morbius flying towards us. We got some speed lines. We're going to get like a shattering kind of effect all around him here, popping out the panel border a little bit. This is all nice and moody. Like, you know, the pages that he wanted to draw, those initial pages where he thought, okay, these are going to be cool, and then I'll draw a story around it. Those are all good pages. And we're going to get more of those pages here. As they keep talking, saying the same things over and over again. I believe I first noted this in the pages of Brigade, this particular method of argument, where you have the villain character explain their goals. Then you have the hero character tell them they're wrong and explain their goals. And then you go back to the villain character who recites their goals over again, and you repeat ad nauseum. The pages themselves look fantastic. This is kind of the entire crux of this revisit, I suppose. Whereas just, yeah, this page is great. I don't want to read it. Like, I'm pretty sure this shot here of Morbius ended up on a t-shirt. Makes you wonder how far down the line this was, where, Todd was pissed off about the t-shirts. And that was one of his big excuses for why him and his buddies were leaving Marvel. How they weren't getting royalties for the t-shirts, or, they couldn't even get a free t-shirt. It's like, stop drawing cool pages then, Todd. It's not hard. Okay, so now we get down to the argument kind of progressing somewhat. So the whole deal is that Morbius's homeless army has told him that they're picking the bad ones. They're bringing the bad ones down from the surface, and those are the people that Morbius is feeding on. He doesn't specifically say he's killing them. It actually kind of implies that he's maybe letting them go after just like drinking a pint or two. Or maybe like keeping them in a larder somewhere where he can go back and, just take a sip every now and then. Spider-Man's saying, yeah, they're not just doing that. They're actually just kind of taking random people. I don't know what they categorize as bad ones, but it seems to be everybody. Morbius thinks that's kind of ridiculous, that these people they've gotten stupid somehow, to the point where they're incapable of lying. And Spider-Man's like, yeah, sure, except they just kind of got an idea in their head and ran with it, because they're stupid. And apparently this is beyond Morbius's conception. So he gathers together a bunch of his homeless buddies and goes, okay, you know what? We got to talk a little bit about who are the bad ones. I know I wasn't going to ask you who the bad ones are, which seems like a problem. This is the point where Morbius just ends up looking like an idiot. It feels like Todd wants to set this up as though there's been like some minor oversight where Morbius just wasn't quite paying enough attention. But this is kind of a major thing where he goes, bring me bad people so that I can drain their blood. And then people start showing up and he doesn't do any kind of due diligence to find out what made these people bad. It just feels like Todd, knowingly made the character kind of dumb. So yeah, he's quizzing them. And it turns out, of course, that the criteria that the homeless guys are using to determine who are the bad ones is that basically they're not the homeless people. Anybody who doesn't already live among them is a candidate to be brought down into the sewers so that they can get fed off of. And, again, cool looking panels. I feel like I've seen this panel in Spawn. Fun close-up on Morbius here with the heavy shadow. Another shot that I think I've seen out of Spawn, this particular pose with the, we're using the same kind of shadow and we're kind of hatching off so that Todd doesn't have to do, really heavy blacks. But, again, it's a nice, fun splash page of Morbius. We've gotten a few of those. So yeah, anyway, Morbius finally realizes that he's been just feeding off of regular people, and now he's starting to feel super guilty about it. And that dude, the nameless guy from the beginning, who used to be the leader, is like, yeah, no, I think I tried to tell you about this a while back, and he kind of just, shuffled me off. So, maybe let me take over again, and I can kind of get us back to being just, regular homeless people who live in the sewers. And Morbius does a, what have I become, and goes flying off. And that's going to be the last we see of him until, I think, Morbius number 1. And then, yeah, we get our close-ups of the homeless people that Spider-Man has been fighting, that Morbius has been leading and turning into kidnappers and potentially murderers. And for some reason, they've all turned into brain-dead cartoons. Again, it just kind of feels like because Todd was getting bored and wanted to draw something a little bit fun. There's no mutation going on. There's no mysticism. There's no scientific reason. It's just Todd wanted to draw some freakish-looking people. And then pretend like he was being empathetic towards them. Yeah, so Spider-Man is willing to let them all go, for which he gets praised for his compassion. And then he swings home in a big old splash page that Todd was able to sell for quite a bit of money. And thinks to himself, yeah, this whole thing was kind of pointless, which is correct. But at least we got this kind of definitive looking image of Todd McFarlane drawing Spidey in the black costume. It's a great looking shot of Spider-Man that if it didn't end up on a t-shirt, somebody should have been fired. And yeah, so that's it for Spider-Man number 14. It's very much the same as Spider-Man number 13. A lot of it looks really good. I mean, I will say that most of this looks better than I think anything Todd ever drew in Spawn. I've probably said before, I think Todd had an idea of what he wanted to do with the first issue of Spawn, and he put a fair amount of effort into that, and then he quickly ran out of ideas and was just trying to get the pages out. And most of it doesn't look particularly good. You know, other than those splash pages that he was designing the books around, but then because he was starting from zero, he had so many pages that he needed to fill with like lore and exposition and dialogue and just building up everything about the comic to the point where he just didn't have anything interesting to draw because everybody was just talking all the time. And then every once in a while, Spawn would throw a little tantrum and put on a fireworks display because Todd had to draw something fun sometimes. This is better than that in terms of how it looks, at least. I kind of get the feeling this might be the last thing Todd has written that I'm going to review for a while. I kind of don't plan on doing one again anytime soon because I don't know, just Todd gets me worked up in a way a lot of people don't. You know, I would say not even Rob gets me worked up that way. You know, Rob is maybe the laziest artist I think I've seen recently, and I think he sponges off of the rich fans he's got left. But with Todd, it's just kind of a different kind of objectionable. I think if he'd never claimed the title of most issues of a comic series owned by an independent publisher, some shit like that, I probably would have been able to let him slide, but that's just such an egregious kind of claim. You know, how many of those did you draw? Not many. How many of those did you write? Not all of them. There was a while there where he was getting other people to write it for him. So what did he do during that time? He owned a copyright. Anyway, I'm just getting into repetitive rants now. I'm not a McFarlane fan, never have been, never will be. That's kind of what it boils down to. I think if we're going to have some fun with a Todd comic going forward, it's going to have to be something written by someone else. So either from his Incredible Hulk run or from his Amazing Spider-Man run. And that's kind of it. I don't think I enjoy anything else he's done. So on that note, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks for sitting through that. And thanks very much for watching. If you like this video, please hit the like button. It helps with all the algorithm stuff. If you want to see more, hit subscribe. And if you really want to help out, in the description, there's a link to my Patreon. And if you go subscribe there, that'll give you access to everything I do. So all sorts of videos, everything to do with the Blood Force comic, including everything to do with the Blood Force Kickstarter. You can also follow me on Instagram and DM me there for commissions. So yeah, that'll do it. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.